Hello Battle Cats players, my name is Chance and thank you so much for tuning into my guide. Today we're going to be taking a look at cat unit number 3 and really your primary damage dealer, or at least one of your primary damage dealers for most of the early game here. Today we are looking at Gross Cat. Gross Cat is unlocked after clearing Philippines in Empire of Cats level or chapter 1. Doesn't cost anything to really unlock him, so you might as well just do it as soon as you get the notification. And he is a very interesting looking cat, and he has one of my favorite character arcs in the whole game. Granted, Battle Cat lore is mostly inferred, if I'm being honest with you. Ponos doesn't really go out of its way to spell out the days and lives and trials and tribulations that these cats go through, but I like to imagine a couple, and I really like Gross Cats. Now, without any further ado whatsoever, let's take a look at his evolutions. So upon first getting this cat, it is of course Gross Cat, and its description reads as able to do a very powerful long range attack, exceptional attack power and range. At level 10, much like all of the other normal cats, it gets its first evolution to Sexy Legs Cat, whose description is has pride in his overly beautiful legs, exceptional attack power and range. And then after that, at level 20 plus 10, or cumulative level of 30, usually just want to use cat capsules, it becomes Macho Leg Cat. Every day is leg day, mastered the art of leg, exceptional attack power and range, strong against aliens. This is one of my coolest headcanon stories. Really, bar none. There are a couple I think are particularly interesting, and Gross Cat is one of them. So imagine, early on, Gross Cat was just picked on like crazy, right? Bullied to no end. And then it had a glow up, right? It became Sexy Legs Cat. Then, after a while of being Sexy Legs Cat, it realized the whole time that happiness wasn't in popularity or external stimulus. It was from your own internal strength. And as a result, Gross Cat started going to the gym, and that's how it became Macho Leg Cat. I don't know, that's how it plays on my head. I think it's kind of funny. I don't think Ponos really has much of a backstory for it, but that's mine. Now let's take a look at some of its performance. As far as its class and role goes, Gross Cat is considered to be a mid-ranger. A mid-ranger is any cat whose range is between 250 to 399. That's considered to be a mid-ranger. Gross Cat falls well within that. He's a damage dealer at the end of the day, so there's not really too much nuance to his role. There are a couple things that need to be considered. I'll get into those in a little bit. First and foremost, great range. At this point in your game especially, he is probably the best attacker you have. We talked about this a little bit in the last video, but so much of a cat's effectiveness, at least offensively, comes down to their range. If you can outrange an enemy, odds are you're going to kill them, and vice versa too. There are a couple enemies in this game with fairly impressive ranges, and if your lineup and your equipped cats are not able to surpass that range or have some kind of slow or freeze status to compensate for it, you're just going to lose. Like, there's nothing you can do, unfortunately. You can only kill something you can hit, and if something can hit you and you can't hit them, it is by all accounts a one-sided fight. So that really is Gross Cat's biggest selling feature. For the early game, there shouldn't be anything that can hit it well, it isn't being hit, if that makes sense. So like there aren't any enemies that would be able to do that one-sided battle with Gross Cat, is I suppose what I'm trying to say. In addition to that, at its true form, it gets a couple other perks. So massive increase to health and attack power, which is great. Also strong against alien enemies, which means not only is Gross Cat really necessary for the early game, it's also viable for the mid and end game as well. At least certain areas of the end game, there are better units to be used, but assuming you've had bad gacha luck, this can be a viable option to slot in. Moving on, the normal and evolved forms also have a very short cooldown time, certainly for an offensive cat, which is great, and they are part of multiple combos. The only real downside is that it's a single target cat, and it's not really that much of a deal breaker, to be completely honest with you. There are plenty of great DPS cats that are single target only. On some stages where it's just like wave upon wave upon wave of enemy, it can be a little bit time consuming. Its attack speed also isn't really the best. There are other cats that specialize in that stuff, so it's not really necessary. If you're curious what strong against means, by the way, it will inflict a 1.5 times multiplier over its damage. So it'll do 1.5 times damage, and it takes half damage. So there's 2 elements to it, both of which are great for the cat. More damage and better survivability. Now let's move on and talk about some strategy and usage while watching some gameplay. Before we get too far into the strategy regarding Gross Cat, I just want to quickly go over cost. Chapter 1, he'll cost about 400 cents. Chapter 2, 600, and Chapter 3, 800. So he's not the cheapest unit, at least at this point in the game, but let me tell you, there are many far more expensive units that will make a near permanent spot on your roster, but you can be a little bit pricey depending on how developed you have your cat worker cat and cat wallet, etc. In any case, as far as strategy goes, because Gross Cat is a mid-ranger, he will need some protection. And the reason that he needs protection is the more range a cat has, the bigger its blind spot is, for lack of a better term. When you're using him, if an enemy gets too close to him, he won't be able to attack that enemy, and that enemy will just chip away at his health endlessly, and it's kind of a waste because he is, quite a bit more expensive than a tank cat would be, or even a regular cat for that sake. So it is just something to be mindful of. Send out your meat shields first, send him out after. It's a good strategy across the board, but especially when it comes to higher range units, it's just an extra consideration that needs to be factored in. Now, outside of that, it's actually really difficult to talk about Gross Cat's viability. Certainly, beginning of the game, he's a powerhouse just because of the damage he can output and the various other things that make him a good unit. Towards the mid game, if you've had bad gacha luck and you need something that can effectively deal with aliens, he is an option. However, towards the end game, he's more of an all-rounder cat, and unfortunately, all-rounder units kind of struggle from the problem of there are other units comparable to them in terms of raw stats, but offer a more niche competitive advantage. So it doesn't make sense in most cases to use Gross Cat towards the end game. It's a viable option, and there are some instances where he'll actually be a cheaper unit than some of those all-around plus niche units. So he can make sense from an economy perspective, but that is very rarely a problem in a lot of the later stages. A lot of the late game comes down to just having the right tools for the right job and getting a little bit lucky. And ultimately, if you are having economy problems, usually it's not really the cost of the cat, it's their respawn timer or their spammability. And there is an argument to be made that in some cases, Gross Cat is superior in that way as well, but not in every case. So there's a little bit of arithmetic that needs to be ran, and there are just a lot of people who don't consider Gross Cat after a while. He does collect dust really towards the end game. A few of the normal cats do, but I feel like Gross Cat is probably more noticeable. I mean, Axe Cat collects his dust really starting right after the early, or really after this point, in all fairness. If you have access to Gross Cat and Axe Cat, there's almost never a reason to use Axe Cat. And I mentioned that in the Axe Cat video with a couple other things, so I'll do my best not to talk about it now. But that really is all there is to say about Gross Cat. If I'm missing anything, put it down beneath in the comments section, but I think my feelings are fairly universal. Now that that's out of the way, let's move on and quickly go over his cat combos. First up, as with most of the cats we've discussed so far, we have Cat Army. This involves Cat, Tank Cat, Axe Cat, Gross Cat, and Cow Cat, and will be the first cat combo we finish up, which is pretty exciting. The cat combo allows the worker cat to start with a +1, which is not the most useful, but better than nothing, I suppose. Up next, we have Long-Legged, which involves Gross Cat, and Aslan Paslan, which is one of the Lugas. This is a slow effect up, slow duration increased by 20%. I actually really like slow. I think it is probably one of the more useful status effects. Makes some stages that would be very difficult just a breeze to deal with. Not quite as good as freeze, but by that same token, far more units have access to slow than they do freeze, so I'll take it as a victory. Especially if you don't really have much else going on and you happen to have a lot of slow units, why not, right? Up next, we have Legs for Days. This is a knockback effect up. Involves Sexy Legs Cat and Crazed Sexy Legs Cat. Knockback distance increased by 10%. Usually knockback isn't something you really want. It just makes stacking a little bit more difficult. But if you're building a rush team or a rush stage, and for some reason you want Legs Cat on it, great. Or Gross Cat on it, great. Also worth noting, I gotta get in the habit of bringing this up more often, but there is no there's no keystone minimum for any of these. So if you have, for example, like Macho Leg Cat, and it calls for Sexy Legs Cat, that's perfectly fine. It's only in the other way it doesn't work. So if the cat combo calls for Sexy Legs Cat, but you have Gross Cat there instead, then it won't work. So you can always move up, but you can't always move down the evolution scale, if that makes sense. So you can't move down at all. Up next, we have Macho Man, which is a Strengthen effect up. Strengthen up buff increases by 20%, which is certainly quite useful. It requires Macho Legs Cat and Beefcake Cat. This is also the start of one of the more interesting kind of battle cats aesthetics, I suppose, for lack of a better term, where there are some torsos in the game that line up very interestingly with some of the lower sections in the game. It is very interesting, leaves for a cool look, looks like a complete cat by the end of it, or sometimes it just looks like one of the most cursed images imaginable. In any case, let's move on here. Up next, we have Gross. This is a freeze effect up, and it is a medium, so it's pretty dang good actually. So it'll be Gross Cat, Crazed Gross Cat, and Creep Mallow. My goodness, that was a tongue twister and a half to get out. It increases freeze duration by 20%. Freeze is, in my opinion, bar none, one of the best statuses in the game. If you have enough freeze units, it is a cakewalk. There aren't a ton of them out there, and some of the best freeze units are Ubers, so they're not the most common to come across. But when you do come across them, they will almost always make stages easier. Freeze not only prevents the enemies from moving forward, but it prevents them from doing any damage whatsoever, and you can still damage them. Anything you can do to make the fight more one-sided will be really to your advantage. This is one of those interesting ones where not only would you, if you're assuming Gross Cat's fully in his, like, or at least I guess in his secondary form, in his evolved form, you would get the benefits of both Gross and Legs for Days, which is kind of interesting to consider. Stacking combos is one of those things that is a very min-max thing to do. It's really cool when you pull it off successfully, but you very often need some rare prerequisites to go all out with it. Up next, we have Pumpkin Pants. This is another freeze effect up, but it is only a small, and it requires Sexy Legs Cat and Catolantron. Freeze duration increased by 10%. So you could, in theory, stack both Gross and Pumpkin Pants if you really wanted to, and that would lead to a 30% freeze duration increase, which is certainly nothing to sneeze at. Now that we're done talking about the cat combos here, let's take a look at some of graphs and charts relating to Gross Cat. And by take a look at, what I mean is I'm going to flash the charts I pulled from the wiki on the screen here. I find the information there is fairly boring and really only makes sense if you really want to min-max the hell out of them. So while you guys are looking over them, I will read some trivia. Gross Cat is one of the two normal cats that actually have a faster attack animation and speed in their evolved and true forms than in their normal forms. The other being Lizard Cat, who will actually be the subject of a very near video. So make sure you like and subscribe so you're notified of that. Unlike all other variants of this cat, Macho Leg Cat doesn't use plural for leg in its name. I didn't actually notice that. It's pretty weird. I don't know if that was like a typo or a translation thing or if it was intentional. Who knows? He and Bird Cat have different animations and forms, which I guess kind of loops back to the first bit of trivia there. Interesting. Variations of Salon Cat usually have descriptions referencing Sexy Cat and Macho Leg Cat. When combined, they appear humanoid, which I actually went over already. Sexy Leg Cat has the second most variants in the game, beside the titular cat. My goodness, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. There is a typo in normal form description saying able to do very long range attack, when it should be able to do a very long range attack. Interesting. I've never noticed that before. I think I've always read it and said it as able to do a very long range attack. Quite the interesting Freudian slip there, for sure. Or maybe not a Freudian slip, maybe just like a lack of dyslexia, I guess. Anyways, that about sums it up for this video. I don't think I missed anything. If I did, feel free to put it down in the comment section and offer any productive criticism you have. In addition to that, thank you so much, guys. I've been making strides to kind of build a backlog of content, even if it's a small one, just so I'm not like feeling super rushed all the time. I think taking my time with a project like this is a little bit better, and the normal cats are pretty easy to talk about, whereas you get kind of more and more complicated as the series progresses. I'm not really expecting to be able to get videos out as quickly at that point, but we will see. As always, like and subscribe so that Cat God can bless your next gotcha roll, and thank you so much. Feel free to check out the links down beneath if you want to know how to further support the channel, and thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate interacting with you, so feel free to leave a comment if for no other reason just to say hi, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one, guys.